Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Ginny and Georgia. Let's talk about it. So Ginny and Georgia is a Netflix series that was created by Sarah Lampert, and this series centers around the characters of Ginny and Georgia. Now, Ginny is a 15-year-old girl who has been forced to upend her life time and time again because of her mother, who continues to move throughout the entirety of the United States for various reasons. Now, her mother has a very complex past, but it means that her relationship with her daughter is just as complex, and we get to see that play out throughout this series because of the tensions that exist between her and her daughter, and the fact that the mother often acts as though she's even younger than her daughter because of the very small age gap between them, as her mother had her at the age of 15, the current age that Georgia is at when we start this series. Oh, I have to say, when I watched this series, I was so excited to make this video. I already knew we were gonna have a good time. Yup. Yeah, because this is the kind of series that has a ton of layers. There's so much social commentary. We're going to be talking about all of it today. We're going to be talking about all of these topics. I can't wait to jump right into this one. But before I do, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. But without further ado, let's dive into the themes, to the character arcs, to the social justice commentary of Ginny and Georgia. First of all, as I already mentioned, there are a ton of interesting themes to explore throughout this series, so that's how I'm going to be dividing up this review, whilst also touching on some character arcs for the characters of the show. But just overall, I have to say that I had a really great time with this series. I absolutely loved watching it episode by episode, and even though I could acknowledge that there were issues with it, it wasn't quite perfect, I am very much looking forward to a second series if Netflix does end up greenlighting it, which I really hope it does. And I do think that the show could improve with the second series. Hopefully, if the show does listen to some feedback, some additional feedback after season 1, it can make the improvements that it needs to for season 2 to be even better. And also, an observation that I couldn't help but make when I was watching this show overall is that it very much reminded me of Little Fires Everywhere, which I believe was a Hulu production from last year. I ended up watching it on Amazon Prime here in the UK, but that series is excellent. It stars Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon, and these two play these very different mothers. But in the case of Kerry Washington's character, I believe Mia, she very much reminded me of the character of Georgia in this show. She was yet another character who had a child at a very young age, and she also had to fend for herself and take care of herself and her child all on her own at a very young age, much like Georgia. And she made some very difficult decisions in her life that followed her throughout the entirety of her life, and we see the repercussions of that in the series, just like we do in Ginny and Georgia. So there are a lot of comparisons to be made between the two series. I would say if I were comparing the both of them, I think that in the case of Little Fires Everywhere, there's just much more of a serious tone. It's much more of a drama than it is a dramedy, as is the case for Ginny and Georgia. And I do think that that serious tone does help when it's tackling with serious issues and topics of, social commentary. Whereas in the case of Ginny and Georgia, that tone, that lighter tone with that injection of comedy, as well as the overall CW-esque aesthetic that it sometimes has to it, sometimes hinders the important and serious discussions that are being had by these characters. But just to touch on the performances overall before we dive into the themes themselves, I really enjoyed the cast of this series. I very much enjoyed Brianne Howie in the role of Georgia Miller. I think she is a phenomenal character. I truly think, oh, what a force to be reckoned with. I think Brianne Howie was incredible in this role. I do believe she's from California and not anywhere near the South, although I don't know if she lived there previously or whatever, but she does the accent very, very well, at least to my ears, which are British, so take that with a grain of salt. But I do think that she sounds great. I think her personality very much shines in this role. The bubbly kind of Southern hospitality personality that she's really laying on thick here is absolutely perfect, and it very much plays into the overall arc of this character as well as her past, which we'll get into in depth. I also very much enjoy the performance of Antonia Gentry. I think she's also great as the character of Ginny. She plays a very nuanced teenage character who's going through a lot, okay? She's going through a lot, and again, we'll discuss that throughout this review, but I think it took a lot of dexterity in her emotional acting to be able to pull this role off. So I think that the actress very much rose to the occasion. All of the actors here very much rose to the occasion, but especially these two who are front and center in the story. Okay, so now let's get into this. This is the part that I was most excited about, to get my little mitts on. I can't wait to dive into this series because there's so much to discuss. The first theme that we're going to be diving into is that of motherhood, and particularly the character of Georgia being a teenage mother, someone who had a child when she was very, very young and under very, very difficult circumstances, and how that has impacted her relationship with her daughter and also her son in the coming years. I think this is absolutely fascinating because in a lot of ways, this show is really about Georgia and her actions as a young teenage mom and the repercussions of that we see play out throughout this series. Now, Georgia learns from a very, very early age, under very difficult circumstances, that she has an attractiveness about her, that men find her physically attractive. And as a result, a lot of them seem to want to own her. They want to have ownership of her. And as we see in an episode of the series itself, where Ginny is trying to explain her mother's approach to sex and to her relationships with men, it seems as though as a result of this traumatic experience that she's had throughout the years with different men, Georgia is more interested in the control aspect of a relationship as opposed to the emotional aspect of it. And that's something that changes as we see with her relationship with the mayor. But in terms of her past and seeing that play out for the very first time, or one of the first times, we see that with her first husband, she uses her looks and her sex appeal to her advantage after she's arrested for running this illegal gambling ring. Listen, okay, she was doing the most, but she's arrested for running this illegal gambling ring, and almost as a result ends up losing Ginny. And so in order to prevent her daughter from landing in foster care, she quickly marries this guy, this sleazy, disgusting pile of mess of a man, okay? She quickly marries him so that she can show the government that she's responsible and that she has a financial income to take care of her child. But it's quickly shown that this man is not going to be supportive. He's not going to be kind or considerate. No. Listen, he's a perv. He's a horrible person. He's disgusting, okay? And so Georgia, as a result, takes matters into her own hands swiftly to take care of herself and her daughter. And that's the first sign that we see that entire kind of setup that will follow her throughout her life, because she will resort to those means more than once afterwards. And in this way, the results of Georgia's first marriage act as a sort of foreshadowing for things to come in her second marriage. I believe her second marriage. I don't think she was married to Austen's father, but in the case of her most recent marriage, the show actually opens up with the funeral of her husband, her now deceased husband, and we learn pretty quickly that the means by which he passed away were very suspicious. Very suspicious indeed. And of course, we do find out that it was as a result of Georgia poisoning him with some wolfsbane. She's old school, okay? She poisoned him with some wolfsbane after seeing him attempt to grope her daughter. That is something that she was not having even for a second. Even for a millisecond, she said absolutely not. And you can understand why. Because of the backstory that I just explained, Georgia has so much trauma and so much anxiety and PTSD and just all of these mental health issues when it comes to her past and association with the father figures in her life. There's no way in hell that she would even take the chance that even the groping that her husband was doing to her daughter in that moment would advance any further. There's no way. She saw that and she made up her mind that instant. And that's just the character that Georgia is that she will do whatever it takes to protect her children. And we have seen time and time again that the lengths of which she will go have no bounds. Now, it seems as though for the most part that Georgia has very much been in fight or flight mode when it comes to her life and taking care of her children. But for the first time, she feels comfortable enough, she feels ready enough financially as well to settle down and to actually grow some roots in a single place after moving from place to place to place. so that her children can thrive in a supportive environment and can actually have a much better future than she had for herself. And so that's why she ends up dragging herself and her kids to Wellsbury, this place in Massachusetts that seems quite affluent. Okay, we're living in a quite wealthy, quite white environment here, and she hopes to settle down in this environment and to allow her kids to thrive there so that once again they can have a better future than she did. But remember how I said this place was affluent, okay? Remember how I said this place was white and wealthy? Well, Georgia can only afford this because of the money that her ex-husband left behind in his will for her. Now, this will is actually being contested by his ex-wife, who believes Georgia to be a gold digger. She believes Georgia to be nothing but a gold digger, okay? So she's saying absolutely not. There's no way that I'm going to allow this woman to inherit all of his money and all of his businesses when she just came along with her low-cut top and destroyed everything that he had built. Absolutely not. As a result of the will being disputed, Georgia can't access the funds that she needs to in order to pay up the mortgage for the new house that she bought in this area, and also presumably to pay for the tuitions of the schools that her kids are going to, you know, just to survive, basically, just to live. She doesn't have any actual money now that this will is being disputed. So as a result, she has to make money ASAP, and that's how she finds herself worming into the mayor's office. Like, oh my god, imagine the first day you're there, and you're already making things happen. You waste no time. She sees how pretty the mayor is. She thinks, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. Oh, another one bites the dust. She knew exactly what the path forward was because she's done this time and time again. And so here in the present, much like in the past, this series shows us the litany of lies, the deception, okay, the cheating, the criminal activity and financial embezzling that goes on in order for Georgia to get her way. We just see the layers upon layers that this character has. And honestly, I think it's just fascinating. I think it was such an enthralling character to follow. She's very much a multifaceted female character, and we love to see it. Honestly, we love to see it. We're seeing more and more extremely complex female characters who aren't just characters that you root for automatically because they're poor or they've gone through difficult things in their lives, but also characters that you have to challenge, also characters that you have to question because they're doing these despicable things. And that is Georgia all in one. She has this incredibly traumatic past, but you still can't help but raise an eyebrow at the things that she's doing in order to sustain herself and her kids. Okay, so now that we have discussed and set up the character of Georgia, let's move on to her daughter Ginny, because another overarching theme of this series is like mother, like daughter. This series very much wants to set up the idea that Ginny, after being influenced by her mother literally her entire life and seeing all of the crazy things that her mother has gone up to, including the lies, the running away, all of these aspects of her character's personality, Ginny is starting to adopt these personality traits for herself in the different circumstances that she's in. For example, like I said, we have an episode where Ginny highlights her mother's tendencies to run away when things get bad. We've seen this time and time again in Georgia's backstory, but we see this at the very end when it comes to Ginny taking Austin with her and just leaving after finding out the true nature of the horrible things that her mother has done in order to protect them. And we also saw this play out to a lesser extent when we explored Ginny's newfound relationships with both Marcus and Hunter. Now, this is the very first time that Ginny has encountered any romantic relationships in her life, and she's always been very skeptical and very kind of anxious towards romantic relationships after seeing the litany of romantic relationships that her mother has been in and how manipulative her mother has been in those relationships. So clearly she has some issues when it comes to being in a romantic relationship as a result of that. And you see how the same personality traits that her mother exhibits in her relationship may have been passed down to Ginny, even if it was unintentional at the beginning. In the case of Hunter, like, he's supposed to be the all-American great guy. He's perfect. He goes to all of these extracurricular classes. And then you have the character of Marcus, who's just kind of dismissed as this asshole, okay? He's Ginny's newfound best friend's twin brother. Okay, so he's pretty much untouchable. Like, he's pretty much a no-go zone. So she's not supposed to be even entertaining the idea of having a romantic relationship with him, apparently. I personally didn't really understand the issue with this. I personally felt like this all could have been resolved with a conversation between Ginny and Max, but maybe the idea is that Ginny wouldn't even know how to approach that because she's never had friends before, and she's certainly never been in a romantic relationship before. So she didn't even have that idea to just talk to Max about what, you know, Max expected and whether or not she would be okay with her pursuing a relationship with her brother. Like, it didn't even occur to her because of her lack of experience with other people, because she's been moved around so many times. But still, even though I do commend the show for trying to draw comparisons between Ginny and Georgia, and especially with Ginny starting to absorb some of Georgia's worst characteristics, I think that was a really cool parallel to draw between the two female characters. However, the major issue with this is that it goes a little bit too far, okay? Because Ginny and Georgia aren't the same. Ginny and Georgia aren't the same in the slightest. I feel like this show kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too when it comes to just how serious Georgia's criminal activity really is, because it's not comparable to Ginny dating two guys at once. Like, it really isn't. Also, she kind of wasn't dating two guys at once, but whatever. We're not talking about the morality of that situation. We're talking about the total tonal dissonance when it comes to these two female characters and what they've done, and the show trying to tell us, look, like, Ginny is going down the same path as her mother. I really don't see that. I really don't see that. Her mother committed murder twice. Her mother killed two men. Her mother has, you know, two probably unlicensed guns. Her mother embezzled money, okay, public funds from the town whilst working for the mayor, okay? Like, we're talking about two different leagues of issues here. So I really don't see how the show can look me dead in the eye and tell me that Ginny is becoming like her mother. The reason why Ginny left is because she's so appalled by what her mother has done. So I really don't see that comparison being fair. And also, I have to say that the circumstances from which her mother was brought up really are different to that of Ginny's, because her mother has tried to provide her with the best life possible. And whilst there may have been a lot of bumps down the road, I think to compare the fact that Ginny is living, yes, under the roof of a very manipulative, okay, a compulsive liar, okay, I understand that part, but to compare that with Georgia, formerly Mary's upbringing, who was actually molested by her stepfather, I don't know. So I do think in the front of trying to display, you know, mother like daughter, it wasn't the strongest theme that the series brought forward. So the next theme that we're going to be exploring is that of trauma and mental illness. Now, this is a very sensitive theme with a lot of sensitive subject matters to get into. Now, hopefully I put a trigger warning before I even started this whole spiel, because there are a few triggering topics that are explored throughout this series, but especially for this section of the video, huge trigger warning for a ton of these subjects that are explored throughout this series that we're going to be diving into for this section in my analysis of how this show depicts mental illness and trauma. What I would say this show does really well when it comes to its depiction of mental illness and trauma is that it gives us a wide variety of what that looks like. We see each of these characters that I'm about to mention go through all of these different types of traumas and react differently to them. So the first one we can touch on is the character of Georgia, and as I already mentioned, this character went through so many traumatic events in her young life. Especially, you have, you know, at the very beginning of her life when she was quite young, and her mother ended up remarrying, I believe, to this man who would end up molesting her as a child. This is just so sickening, so disgusting. I was so heartbroken for this character, seeing that that was the environment that she had to grow up in, and to make matters worse, as if they couldn't already be despicable, horrible. But it turns out that after Georgia ended up leaving and running away as a result of the abuse that she was suffering in that household, that abuse was then directed towards her younger sister, who was actually her stepfather's biological child, I believe, because they don't have the same fathers. no words, literally no words. And so of course I felt very much vindicated. Of course I wholly approved of Georgia going back to her stepfather and shooting him right in the hand. Absolutely, because it was what a horrible human being. But in the case of how Georgia deals with this trauma, we see that actually she hasn't told Ginny anything about, you know, how she grew up and the circumstances by which she grew up in her household at all, until we reach that episode of the series where she finally tells her. And it's kind of like this release, this dump of information after Ginny has continuously been calling her a liar and someone who holds, you know, so many secrets. Georgia just gets so fed up and she just tells Ginny outright that this is the experience that she had when she was younger, in an effort to prove that she can share some of her secrets. And also, which is another running theme throughout the series, the idea that she wants to protect her child as much as possible from these adult themes, these adult worries that Georgia had to face from a very young age. For example, we do also see later on when Ginny turns 16 that, you know, after the shenanigans that occur on that day, Georgia does end up turning around and telling her, oh, by the way, we're broke. Like, you want to be an adult? Well, you get to know the whole truth. We're broke. We have no money. I have no means by which to support you guys financially. So good luck. One of these days we might end up homeless again. I very much feel like this ties into that theme of Georgia trying to protect her kids, but this time around mentally speaking as well. But in terms of how she deals with the trauma that she faced when she was younger and perhaps is continuing to face into adulthood, it seems as though, as I already said, it kind of manifests in her interactions and the way that she treats her relationships with men. The idea that she constantly needs to be in control because she didn't have that control growing up when she was being abused by these men. So next we have the character of Ginny, and much like the character of Pearl in Little Fires Everywhere, Ginny hasn't been able to set up roots anywhere because of her mother's constant moving around. And so she's never really had friends. She's never really been able to live out an ordinary teenage life, going to high school, worrying about things like college admissions and things like that. She hasn't really had that experience previously. And so when she finds herself in Wellsbury and in the high school of, you know, overachieving students, it's very much a huge adjustment for her. All of that she has to deal with the lack of social skills that she has as a result of never having been established anywhere before, leads to her doing some pretty awful things to herself. She does partake in some self-harm in this series, which is very distressing to see, and like I said, very triggering. And speaking of triggering, I have no idea why this series didn't come with a few trigger warnings, especially for certain episodes where we see these characters harming themselves in the way that we saw for The Crown season 5, I believe, or in the case of, you know, 13 Reasons Why. Why didn't we get trigger warnings? Why didn't we get... Because these issues are serious. And not to mention their portrayals are very vivid. They're very explicit. So to have not a single warning in sight before these episodes, I felt was very irresponsible for Netflix and, you know, the team behind Ginny and Georgia. I think it very much should have come with those warnings because, like I said, the things that are explored here and seen here explicitly are very, very triggering. Now, the series also attempts to explore the character of Austen's mental health and the repercussions of them always having to move from place to place, as well as Austen kind of being neglected by his mother, especially in comparison to the interaction that Georgia gives Ginny and the focus that Georgia gives Ginny. Austen often ends up being left alone and with no one looking out for him. He's going through these troubling times of moving to this new school, being bullied by this horrible kid. Oh, this horrible kid. Like, I don't want to come on here and cussing kids out. Like, who am I? That's not appropriate, but that kid sucks. Leave the kid alone with his Harry Potter glasses. He looks adorable. What's wrong with you? Anyway, although I did not approve of Georgia taking matters into her own hands and encouraging Austen to punch the kid in the face. Like, come on, there must be a middle ground. Anyways, I digress. I do think that Austen, for the most part, is neglected. I especially think it's horrible when he finds finds out that it was actually his mother writing letters to him as his father from prison. And when he finds that out, you can see the heartbreak that he faces because he stops speaking completely. He becomes mute, and that seems to be how he deals with his, mental health situation, or how it manifests at least. But as I said, what's interesting about this series when it comes to the topic of mental health is that it does try to explore various aspects of mental health. And so we do have that theme seeping into some of the other supporting characters in the show. For example, we have the character of Marcus, who's dealing with the loss of his best friend. He's very much in a dark place when we meet him, but we also find out that actually he was in an even worse state previously, just after his best friend had passed, to the point where I believe he contemplated self-harm as well, or perhaps he actually did it. He was also experiencing some suicidal thoughts. Like, this is very, very deep. This is very, very heavy for this series to be tackling all at once, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's just heartbreaking to see, especially because he tells Ginny this after having witnessed her burning herself and self-harming, and he kind of shares it as like this moment of solidarity, but also trying to tell her to find help and to find someone to talk to, because that will help things improve. I very much felt like that was him speaking through the screen to the audience, to perhaps any kids or young adults who are experiencing similar emotions and similar mental health states, so that they could also seek some help and seek some guidance or someone to talk to in those situations. I felt like that was very intentional in that way, but that still wasn't enough. We needed a trigger warning for sure. And finally, we do also have the character of Abby, who's one of the Mang Gang. What a ridiculous name. But anyways, the Mang Gang, and Abby seems to suffer from some body image issues. We see one very profound scene of her standing in front of the mirror and taping up her thighs to make them appear slimmer and have that kind of thigh gap that's like envied on Instagram. It's absolutely ridiculous. We see the impact of these unrealistic body image expectations from Instagram, from the media, on these young girls. Just an array of issues that are explored throughout this series, and like I said, I very much commend the series for doing so. But if I did have a criticism for the portrayal of these mental health issues in this series, it would be that I personally don't think it's enough anymore to just throw things at a wall and hope that it sticks. Like, I really don't think that this is enough, and I also don't think that it's particularly responsible. I think if a series is going to set out to tackle such heavy, consequential topics in a show, it needs to really hone in on these specific topics and do them well, do them justice, especially when they're directed towards a younger audience. Because up until now, we've seen series like this get praise for bringing up the discourse, right? Like, oh, this series has started a discourse surrounding suicide, as was the case for 13 Reasons Why, and that was also directed towards younger kids. But I personally feel like we've gotten to the point where it's not just enough to bring up the discussion. You need to bring some talking points along too. You need to bring a full-on essay, not just bullet points, okay? And if you don't have enough for a whole essay, how about you cut the bullet points in half and tackle the topics that you really can in depth to do them justice. One topic that I think that this series does a pretty good job of exploring as is the discussion around pretty privilege. Listen, let's dive into it, okay? So for those of you who don't know, pretty privilege is a social concept by which people who are deemed conventionally attractive are said to go ahead in the world due to their attractiveness, okay? They're able to move forward further than those who aren't as conventionally attractive because of their good looks, okay? And we see this play out time and time again, especially when it comes to the character of Georgia, of course, which we'll talk about in a second. But before you even delve into the discussion of pretty privilege, you need to recognize that one of the fundamental concepts of pretty privilege is the idea that there is a certain class of people that are more attractive than all others, okay? And when it comes to American culture and Western culture, I have issues with the term Western, but we're not talking about that today. When it comes to American culture and Western culture, the people who tend to be deemed more attractive or most attractive are people who exhibit ideal, Eurocentric, Aryan features, okay? Because yes, this concept is based in white supremacy. What's new? What's new? So we have here a character who exemplifies a lot of those Aryan features, and she knows that she's physically attractive because she's had to learn that a horrible way from a very young age by the attention that she's gotten from these old, disgusting, despicable men. So as a result of that, however, instead of shying away from her attractiveness and her, pretty privilege, Georgia has learned how to weaponize that in order to get what she wants and she needs for her children. However, what I found even more interesting and something that isn't quite as explored, especially in white-focused media, is how someone like Ginny could also benefit from pretty privilege because she is this biracial girl. Now, we're going to be talking about this in a second. Don't you even worry about it. But when it comes to the character of Ginny, we do often see people calling her so beautiful. People saying that she looks exotic. We very much do see several mentions of Ginny's attractiveness, even if some of it does actually come from her boyfriend, so it makes sense. But we see that Ginny herself does benefit from some of that pretty privilege which she inherited from her mother, who is a white woman, although we do also see that she doesn't benefit from quite as much pretty privilege from her mother, because you do also see that some people have the audacity to say that Ginny's hair looks better straightened, as if anyone asked you, Brody, for your opinion. No one asked Brody for his opinion. Did anyone? No. So why is he talking? Why on earth is Brody talking about Ginny's hair when he should be shutting his mouth? I got so angry. But interestingly enough, we see that Ginny actually wears her hair straight for a few episodes following that, which breaks my heart because this is something that should be her decision and her decision alone. But unfortunately, because of these, beauty ideals that are set up in American and Western society that are rooted in white supremacy, make no mistake, Ginny is being told that her whiter side, or looking more like her mother, is going to make her more attractive, and as a result she kind of complies with those ideals in those episodes. Which brings me to the next topic of discussion, which is the biracial experience. Now, before we even dive into this one, first off, I do want to address the fact that this series is very inclusive and very diverse, and that brings a smile to my face, truly, as we see more series that adopt, more inclusivity and more diversity in its cast and its characters. Not only do we have a pretty diverse cast in terms of their race and ethnicity, although I will say I did note that the majority of the cast is lighter than a paper bag, but we already know that this is Netflix, and at this point, are we surprised? No, we're really not. But anyway, I did notice this. Okay, the majority of the cast could pass a paper bag test, whatever, but we also do have a lot of diversity in terms of sexuality being displayed here, with of course the character of Max being a lesbian character who has a lesbian relationship in the series. It's not just something that's sprinkled in for the fun of it. It actually plays an intrinsic part of the storyline, which is very much appreciated. And of course we also have Max and Marcus's father being a deaf man, and so they have to speak to him in a sign language, which I found so heartwarming. I really enjoyed seeing that. Honestly, I don't know if the actors actually knew sign language to begin with. Surely they would have learned it for this role perhaps, but if it is the case where they did learn it for this role specifically, hats off to them for making it look so natural. The way that they interacted with their father on screen was just so well done. It did feel like we were just a fly on the wall looking in their household and seeing them just interact with their father as they would at any point in time, because they've just become so accustomed to speaking verbally but also doing sign language. Excellent job. I very much enjoyed that. But when it comes to racial diversity, as I already mentioned, oftentimes when we see these Netflix series, most of the cast, while they may be from different ethnic backgrounds and racial backgrounds, can all pass a paper bag test. Listen, Netflix and indeed Hollywood in general seems to be allergic to dark skin. You would genuinely think that these Hollywood companies, studios, actually have a genuine allergy towards melanin. Like, the more melanin that's in the the area, the more they sneeze. It seems that way. As a result of the putrid colorism in Hollywood, we have seen an influx, especially in the last 5 years. I don't know what is going on. Things are moving backwards, but we have seen an influx of lighter skinned actresses, oftentimes biracial actresses, being used as substitutions, being used in lieu of hiring darker skinned actresses. And this particularly affects women, because I have to say, we oftentimes do see, you know, darker skinned male characters who are paired up with lighter skinned female characters. We see it so often, so many times. But in the case of actresses, they are often portrayed by biracial actresses who have lighter skin and of course the Eurocentric features, which very much abide by the laws of the beauty standards of Western society that are rooted in white supremacy. However, what did impress me about this series especially is the fact that we do have a lighter skinned actress at the center of this story, but she is actually portraying a mixed race character, and as a result her experiences, her life experiences that are explored in this series reflects that. And I really enjoyed that about this show, because we scarcely see it. Because the thing is that not only does, you know, mixed race people portraying you know, wholly black female characters in a series or in a film do injustice to those black female characters, but it also does injustice to mixed race characters as well, because the two life experiences that we get there are not the same. And so here we have a biracial actress, I believe, portraying a biracial character, and the fact that she is biracial or mixed race is very much intrinsically part of her story. Throughout the series, we see the microaggressions that she has to face, you know, people commenting on her hair even though they have no reason to, people calling her aggressive in the case of her AP English teacher, and, you know, singling her out for speaking out about certain things. And of course, as I mentioned before, you have some people calling her exotic, as if she's a plant, as if she's a fruit. And at the same time, you also have that aspect of the character where she feels like she's not black enough, right? When she's speaking to her father, when she visits that kind of poetry, slam poetry situation, and she feels like she doesn't quite fit in. And also at the very end, we see her trying to fit in with the, you know, the tiny black population in her school, but she doesn't feel like she can be a part of that group either. Although I have to say, I hate to be the one to say it, but I wasn't a huge fan of how they presented that tiny population of black students in that school as the kind of plan D for Ginny. Like, I didn't like that whatsoever. I think the nice black girl who was approaching Ginny at the start of the series and trying to get her to go to these like leadership programs and trying to get her to do the college application stuff that she needed to do, by the way, before she even knew about them. I felt so bad for her, and honestly I was side-eyeing Ginny at the end there, where she was like talking to her, you know, unloading all of this stuff that she's had to deal with as a biracial girl on this black girl, and I'm just like, this, it's not her job to listen to you right now. Quite frankly, like, I'm honestly tired, because this black girl kind of opened up her arms to her and held her during that moment, even though throughout the entire series she'd been ignored, she'd been dismissed by Ginny in favor of her following the man gang. I was like, I don't know. So it was no surprise then that she didn't fit in with them. I understand the point that they were trying to make, and the fact that, you know, they're black and so she doesn't quite fit in with their culture, but it's also the fact that she's been ignoring them throughout the entirety of the year. So of course she didn't quite get along with them on the onset of them hanging out, because she doesn't know them like that and she didn't care to try to. But anyways, I digress. I do like the fact that this series does explore the fact that this character is a biracial character, how that affects her daily life, whether it be her relationships with her friends, with her boyfriend. That argument that she had with Hunter was incredible. It was incredible. I was cringing and I was angry at Hunter because I heard what he was saying and I didn't love it, okay? But Ginny was also saying some messed up stuff, and I love the parallel that they drew between the characters, because they're both mixed race, they're both from two different cultures. But in Hunter's case, he's half Taiwanese, and he was also expressing, you know, the issues that he faces as a result of that, and not feeling at home in either culture that he's a part of. I love that parallel. That was fascinating to, I wish we could have gotten more of that, honestly, because it was excellent. But yeah, I very much enjoyed the exploration of this topic. That definitely elevated the series for me personally. So overall, like I said, I did have a fun time with this series, even though it did skew towards the CW route a little too often for me to feel confident about the way that it tackled some of the very heavy, very, very important topics that it did, and especially to have it targeted towards a young audience. I think you do have that added responsibility to make sure that you do a good enough job to not influence your audience in a negative way, especially your most vulnerable audiences. And of course, going back to what I said earlier, there should have been trigger warnings for sure. If we can get trigger warnings for The Crown, okay, with the scenes with Princess Diana, we can very much get trigger warnings for this series, which goes even more in depth and explicitly so with these triggering topics. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Ginny and Georgia a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Ginny and Georgia, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.